That little garage isn't a business, the female CEO said with a laugh. It's a museum for bad decisions. 10 days later, investors would be fighting each other for a chance to own it. On a bright Thursday morning in Bozeman, Montana, the smell of motor oil drifted through the cool spring air as Ethan Walker tightened the final bolt on a customer's aging Ford F-150. The garage around him was modest. The corrugated metal roof rattled softly whenever the wind rolled down from the mountains. The concrete floor carried years of stains that no amount of scrubbing could completely erase. To most people passing by on Highway 191, Walker Auto looked like just another struggling small-town repair shop trying to survive in a world of giant corporations and shiny electric vehicles. But Ethan never cared much about appearances. He cared about doing honest work, paying his bills, and making sure his 11-year-old daughter had everything she needed. "Dad, you forgot your coffee again." Lily Walker appeared from the office carrying a steaming paper cup. Her blonde ponytail bounced as she walked. Ethan smiled and accepted it. "You keep saving me every day." "Someone has to," she replied. "You'd probably forget your own name if I wasn't around." Ethan chuckled. The sound was warm, genuine, and rare. Moments like these mattered to him more than money ever could. Across the street, however, a very different world was arriving. A convoy of black luxury SUVs rolled into town, drawing curious looks from pedestrians and shop owners. The vehicles stopped near the garage. Doors opened. Men and women in tailored suits stepped out carrying tablets and portfolios. At their center walked Victoria Hayes, CEO of Hayes Mobility, one of the fastest-growing electric vehicle companies in America. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to boardrooms, headlines, and billion-dollar decisions. Sunglasses shielded her eyes from the Montana sun as she surveyed the row of aging businesses. Her team followed closely behind. "This is the location?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," one executive answered. "The city wants redevelopment proposals for this entire block." Victoria's gaze settled on Walker Auto, the faded sign, the weathered walls, the old pickup parked outside. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Not the kind born from kindness, the kind born from judgment. She crossed the street toward the garage. Ethan looked up from the truck as the group approached. He wiped his hands on a shop rag. "Can I help you?" Victoria removed her sunglasses. "You own this place?" "I do." She glanced around slowly. Her executives exchanged amused looks. "Interesting." Ethan simply waited. Victoria folded her arms. "I've seen storage sheds with more potential." A few members of her team laughed. Ethan remained calm. Lily stood near the office door, listening carefully. "This garage has served this town for a long time," Ethan said quietly. Victoria smiled. "That may be true, but let's be honest. In today's economy, this isn't a business. It's a museum for bad decisions." More laughter followed. For a moment, the only sound inside the garage was the distant hum of traffic and the soft ticking of a cooling engine. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply looked at Victoria with the steady patience of a man who no longer measured his worth by other people's opinions. Then Lily stepped forward. Her voice was small but clear. "My dad built this place." The laughter stopped. Victoria glanced down at the girl. Ethan gently rested a hand on his daughter's shoulder. The morning sunlight streamed through the open garage door, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. And though no one standing there realized it yet, the little garage they were mocking was hiding a secret that would soon change everything. That evening, the Montana sky glowed amber behind the mountains as Ethan locked the front door of the garage. The last customer had left an hour earlier. The tools were back in their places. The service bay sat quiet beneath rows of aging fluorescent lights. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain. Inside, only one sound remained: the steady scratching of a pencil. Lily sat at the counter drawing in a worn notebook while Ethan finished paperwork. Neither spoke for several minutes. They did not need to. Silence had always been comfortable between them. Finally, Lily looked up. "Dad." Ethan raised his eyes from an invoice. "Yeah." She hesitated. "Did what that woman said bother you?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. For a moment he stared toward the dark service bay where countless long days and late nights had passed. "No," he answered softly. Lily frowned. "Not even a little?" Ethan smiled. "People can only insult what they understand. Most people never stay long enough to understand anything." Lily lowered her pencil. I still did not like it. Neither did I. That answer surprised her. Ethan folded the paperwork and set it aside. But there is a difference between being hurt and being distracted. Lily listened carefully. Which one was it? Neither. He smiled again. It was just noise. The girl nodded slowly. She wanted to believe him. Part of her did. But another part remembered the laughter from that afternoon. The expensive suits. The smug expressions. The way they looked at the garage like it was something broken. Ethan stood and walked toward the back of the building. The overhead lights dimmed as he passed beneath them. Near the rear wall stood a steel door painted gray. Unlike everything else in the garage, it looked newer, stronger. A keypad sat beside the frame. Lily watched him glance toward it. You are going back there tonight? She asked. Ethan paused. Maybe for a little while. Working on your project? Maybe. The answer made her smile. Ethan always answered questions about the room the same way. Maybe. For years that door had remained closed. Customers never entered. Employees never entered. Even Lily had only seen brief glimpses when Ethan stepped inside. Workbenches. Screens. Strange metal components. Nothing more. The mystery only grew with time. One day you are going to tell me what is in there, she said. Ethan chuckled. One day. Outside, headlights swept across the garage windows. A pickup truck rolled slowly past. Then another. Then a third. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. In a small town, unusual attention rarely stayed hidden for long. News traveled faster than the internet. By morning, half of Bozeman would know that a famous CEO had visited. Walker Auto. The question was not whether people would talk. The question was why. Ethan stepped outside to take out the trash. Across the street, beneath a glowing street lamp, he noticed a black luxury SUV parked quietly along the curb. The windows were tinted. The engine was off. Someone inside appeared to be watching the garage. After several seconds, the vehicle pulled away and disappeared into the night. Ethan stood motionless for a moment. The cool wind brushed against his jacket. Something had shifted. He could feel it, like the distant rumble before a storm. Back inside, Lily closed her notebook. Everything okay? Ethan looked toward the empty road where the SUV had vanished. Then he smiled gently. Yeah. But deep down, he knew the attention had only just begun. The next morning arrived with a pale blue sky stretched across the Montana horizon and sunlight spilling through the front windows of Walker Auto. Ethan unlocked the garage before 7 o'clock, as he always did. The familiar scent of machine oil, rubber, and freshly brewed coffee greeted him like an old friend. Routine had become a form of peace in his life. It was predictable, honest, quiet, yet something felt different. Before he could finish rolling up the main garage door, a silver sedan pulled into the parking lot. Then another vehicle arrived. Then a third. Ethan paused. That was unusual for this hour. A middle-aged man stepped out of the first car carrying a leather portfolio. Another woman emerged from the second vehicle holding a tablet. Neither looked like customers. They looked like people searching for something. Mr. Walker? The woman asked. Ethan nodded cautiously. That is me. We heard about your property. Ethan glanced at her. My property. The redevelopment project. Before he could answer, another voice interrupted. Do you have any plans to sell? Ethan blinked. No, the two visitors exchanged a look. Neither seemed disappointed. Instead, they appeared intrigued. Across town, inside a sleek temporary office overlooking the redevelopment district, Victoria Hayes stood beside a floor-to-ceiling window reviewing reports. One of her executives entered carrying a folder. You should probably see this. Victoria barely looked up. What is it? Interest reports. For the redevelopment site? Not exactly. He handed her the folder. Victoria opened it. Her expression remained calm for several seconds. Then her eyes narrowed. Walker Auto. Yes. Why would investors care about a small repair shop? That is what we are trying to figure out. Victoria closed the folder slowly. The answer irritated her more than she expected. Meanwhile, back at the garage, Ethan continued working. He changed brake pads on a pickup truck. He rotated tires on an old SUV. He answered customer questions. Yet every hour someone new seemed to arrive. A commercial real estate broker, a venture consultant, an acquisition specialist. None of them wanted repairs. They wanted information. What exactly do you do here? One man asked. Ethan smiled politely. Mostly fix cars. The man laughed softly. I think there is more to the story than that. Ethan offered no response. By late afternoon, Lily arrived after school carrying her backpack. She immediately noticed the unfamiliar vehicles parked outside. "Dad?" she asked quietly. "Why are there so many people here?" Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. "Good question." Lily studied the visitors through the office window. "Do you know what they want?" Ethan glanced toward the rear of the building where the gray steel door remained locked. "Not yet." As evening settled across Bozeman and the last customer finally left, Ethan remained alone inside the garage. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Shadows stretched across the concrete floor. For a long moment, he stood motionless. Then he walked toward the steel door. He entered a code. The lock clicked. The heavy door slowly opened. Beyond it sat a hidden workshop unlike anything the rest of the garage suggested. Screens glowed quietly. Workbenches held carefully organized components. Technical drawings covered one wall. In the center of the room rested a machine hidden beneath a gray protective cover. Ethan stared at it for several seconds. The air felt still, heavy, almost expectant. Then his phone vibrated. One new message appeared on the screen. Unknown. Number. The text contained only one sentence. "We know what you built." Ethan stared at the message for several seconds. The glow from the phone screen reflected faintly across the hidden workshop as silence settled around him. "We know what you built." No signature. No explanation. No demand. Just 7 words. He locked the screen and slipped the phone into his pocket. For years he had worked in secrecy. For years nobody had paid attention. Now suddenly strangers were asking questions they should not have known to ask. The following morning began before sunrise. Frost clung to the grass outside the garage while a pale orange glow crept across the eastern horizon. Ethan was already working when Lily arrived carrying 2 breakfast sandwiches from a diner down the street. "You got here early again," she said. "Could not sleep," Ethan replied. Lily narrowed her eyes. "Something is going on." Ethan smiled. "Something is always going on." Before she could press further, a convoy of vehicles entered the parking lot. This time there were cameras, reporters, business consultants. Even a drone hovered briefly overhead before moving away. Lily looked out the office window. "Okay, that is definitely new." Ethan quietly set down a wrench. Across town, Victoria Hayes watched a live market briefing from her temporary office. One headline caught her attention immediately. Unusual investor activity surrounding local automotive property. Her jaw tightened. "Give me answers," she told her executive team. "Today." Less than an hour later, she arrived at Walker Auto accompanied by engineers, analysts, and several senior advisors. The parking lot was crowded. Curious locals stood along the sidewalk watching the activity. Victoria stepped from her vehicle with the same confidence she always carried. But this time, there was something else beneath it. Curiosity. She walked directly toward Ethan. "We need to talk." Ethan looked up from the truck he was repairing. "About what?" "About why investors from 3 states away suddenly care about this garage." Ethan shrugged. "You would have to ask them." Victoria folded her arms. "I am asking you." Ethan returned to his work. "Then I cannot help." "You." Several members of her team exchanged amused looks. One engineer glanced around the aging building and shook his head. "There is nothing here," he said. "Old equipment. Old lifts. Old tools." Another laughed softly. "Maybe investors are buying nostalgia now." A few others joined the laughter. Nearby, Lily heard every word. She lowered her gaze, but remained silent. Ethan tightened one final bolt and calmly stood. "Finished?" a customer asked. "Runs perfectly," Ethan answered. The customer started the engine. The truck purred smoothly. "You always figure it out," the man said with a grin. "Best mechanic in Montana." Ethan smiled politely. The customer drove away. Victoria watched the exchange carefully. The crowd, the loyalty, the respect. None of it matched the picture she had formed in her mind. Yet she refused to let go of her assumptions. "You are hiding something," she said. Ethan met her eyes for the first time that morning. "Maybe you were just looking in the wrong place." The wind moved through the open garage door. Papers rustled softly on a nearby desk. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the valley. Then one of Victoria's analysts rushed toward her holding a tablet. His face had gone pale. "You need to see this," he said. Victoria took the device and stared at the screen. For the first time since arriving in Montana, her confidence visibly faltered. Victoria took the tablet and stared at the screen. The chatter around the garage slowly faded as her attention locked onto a series of reports. patent searches, engineering assessments, market projections. Her eyes moved from one page to the next, then back again. This cannot be right, she said quietly. The analyst swallowed. We checked 3 times. One of her engineers stepped closer. What is it? Victoria hesitated. There is a prototype energy efficiency system registered under a private holding company. The engineer shrugged. So, Victoria looked up. The registration address is this garage. Silence followed. Not complete silence. The distant sound of traffic still drifted along the highway. A loose chain rattled against a nearby flagpole. Somewhere inside the garage, an air compressor clicked off. But among Victoria's team, the laughter was gone. The engineer reached for the tablet. That has to be a mistake. That is what I thought. Victoria replied. It is not. Ethan continued organizing tools as though none of it concerned him. His calm only made the tension stronger. Mr. Walker, one analyst said. Would you mind explaining this? Ethan placed a wrench back onto its rack. Explaining what? The patents. Ethan shrugged. They belong to the company that filed them. Several people exchanged frustrated looks. And who owns that company? Another asked. Ethan smiled politely. That sounds like a question for the company. Lily watched from the office. She knew that smile. It was the same smile her father wore whenever he already knew more than everyone else in the room. Across the parking lot, a black SUV arrived. Then another. Within minutes, 3 additional vehicles had pulled into empty spaces near the street. Men and women in business attire stepped out carrying folders and briefcases. Victoria recognized one immediately. Richard Bennett, founder of Bennett Capital, a man whose investment decisions regularly moved entire markets. Her expression changed. What is he doing here? She whispered. Richard crossed the lot with measured confidence. He nodded politely to Ethan. Good afternoon. Ethan nodded back. Richard. Victoria blinked. You know each other? Richard smiled. We have spoken before. That answer only deepened the mystery. One of Victoria's executives leaned toward her. Why would someone like Bennett visit a small garage? Before she could answer, Richard turned toward Ethan. Have you reconsidered my proposal? Ethan shook his head. Not yet. Richard laughed softly. I had to ask. The surrounding investors suddenly became far more interested. Phones appeared. Notes were taken. Quiet conversations spread through the crowd. The atmosphere shifted from curiosity to competition. Victoria felt it immediately. So did everyone else. Richard looked toward the building. May I see it? Ethan followed his gaze. The request was not directed at the service base. It was directed toward the rear of the structure, toward the area nobody ever entered, toward the steel door hidden behind years of secrecy. Ethan remained silent for several seconds. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the open garage entrance, casting long golden lines across the concrete floor. Dust drifted slowly through the beams of light. Every eye in the building settled on him. Then, for the first time, Ethan reached into his pocket and removed a small keycard. All right, he said quietly. But once that door opens, things are going to change. No one moved. No one spoke. The atmosphere inside the garage changed the moment Ethan stepped toward the steel door. Even the investors who had spent decades negotiating billion-dollar deals seemed unusually quiet. The faint hum of fluorescent lights echoed overhead as Ethan pressed the keycard against the reader. A soft beep followed. Then another. The locking mechanism released with a muted click. Lily watched from a few feet away. Her eyes widened. You are really opening it? She asked. Ethan looked at her and smiled. I think it is time. The heavy door swung inward. For a moment, nobody entered. The hidden workshop beyond looked nothing like the aging garage surrounding it. Clean white lighting illuminated rows of workstations. Computer screens displayed engineering models and performance simulations. Precision tools hung neatly organized along stainless steel walls. Every surface reflected years of discipline and quiet dedication. Victoria stared in disbelief. One of her engineers took a slow step forward. Then another. This is impossible, he whispered. Richard Bennett smiled, but said nothing. He already understood more than most people in the room. At the center of the workshop stood a sleek machine covered by a gray protective sheet. It was not large. It was not flashy. Yet every person present immediately sensed its importance. One analyst approached a workstation and glanced at the technical data displayed on a monitor. His expression changed instantly. These efficiency numbers cannot be real. Another engineer hurried over. Let me see that. Within seconds, several specialists were reviewing the information. The room filled with short questions and stunned reactions. How long has this been here? Who designed this? Why has nobody seen it before? Ethan remained calm. Because nobody asked the right questions. Victoria slowly walked around the workshop. Every detail challenged her assumptions. The garage she had mocked now felt like the entrance to something far larger. She stopped beside a wall covered in engineering sketches. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the signatures. These designs go back almost 10 years, she said. Ethan nodded. Some of them do. You build all of this yourself? Not all at once. His voice remained steady. A few hours at a time. Before work. After work. Weekends. Holidays. Whenever life allowed. Silence followed. The answer carried more weight than any presentation ever could. Lily looked around the workshop with quiet amazement. For years, she had known her father was working on something important. She had never imagined this. Richard finally stepped toward the covered machine. May I? Ethan paused briefly before nodding. Richard carefully pulled away the protective sheet. A collective breath swept through the room. Beneath it sat a fully assembled prototype unlike anything Victoria had ever seen. Elegant, efficient, purposeful. The design was years ahead of current market offerings. One engineer simply removed his glasses and stared. Another sat down without saying a word. Victoria felt her heartbeat quicken. She looked from the machine to Ethan and back again. The mechanic she had dismissed was standing beside technology capable of changing an entire industry. Then a phone rang. Someone answered. Another phone rang seconds later. Then another. Investors were calling. Partners were calling. Firms from New York, Chicago, Dallas, and Silicon Valley were suddenly demanding information. The news was already spreading. Richard Bennett looked at Ethan and smiled. I believe your quiet days are officially over. The next 48 hours transformed Walker Auto into the most discussed address in Montana. News traveled faster than anyone expected. Financial blogs published speculation. Industry analysts released reports. Investment firms dispatched representatives. By Monday morning, vehicles lined both sides of the street outside the garage. Some visitors traveled hundreds of miles simply to see the place for themselves. Ethan arrived before sunrise as usual. He unlocked the front door, switched on the lights, and brewed coffee exactly as he had done for years. Outside, however, the world had changed. Lily stepped out of the truck and stared at the crowd already gathering near the sidewalk. This is getting crazy, she said. Ethan looked around calmly. It will settle down eventually. Do you actually believe that? Lily asked. Ethan smiled. Not really. Inside the garage, the phones never stopped ringing. One caller offered a partnership. Another offered a licensing agreement. A third proposed a private meeting in New York. Ethan politely declined them all. Around noon, Richard Bennett returned carrying a slim leather folder. You should probably look at these. Ethan opened the folder and raised an eyebrow. Acquisition offers. Several of them. The smallest number had 8 figures attached to it. Lily nearly dropped her soda when she saw the totals. That cannot be real. Richard laughed softly. Unfortunately for my competitors, it is. Across the room, another investor approached carrying a separate proposal. Then another. Soon a line had formed near Ethan's workbench. Men and women who normally negotiated billion-dollar transactions were patiently waiting for a few minutes of his attention. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Just days earlier, many of these same people would not have noticed him. Now they were competing for a chance to speak with him. Victoria Hayes watched everything unfold from a distance. Her executives were growing increasingly nervous. We need to make an offer, one said. A serious offer. Another nodded. If Bennett Capital gets exclusive access, we lose our advantage. Victoria remained silent. She had spent her career reading people, understanding leverage, predicting outcomes. Yet Ethan Walker refused to behave according to any model she understood. He was not chasing attention. He was not maximizing publicity. He was not using pressure to drive up the price. If anything, he seemed more interested in repairing a customer's pickup truck than reviewing multi-million-dollar proposals. That confused her more than anything else. Later that afternoon, she finally approached him alone. Can I ask you something? Ethan looked up from his workbench. Sure. Victoria folded her arms. Why are you turning everyone down? Ethan considered the question. Because they are trying to buy the wrong thing. What does that mean? He glanced around the garage. The old lifts, the worn concrete, the tools he had used for years. Then he looked toward Lily, laughing with a customer near the office. "They think this is about technology," he said quietly. "It never was." Victoria followed his gaze. For the first time, she saw something she had completely missed. The invention mattered. The money mattered. The attention mattered. But none of it explained the man standing in front of her. The real value had never been hidden inside the workshop. It had been hidden inside his character. And as another group of investors entered the garage carrying fresh offers and larger numbers, Victoria realized something unsettling. The bidding war was no longer about who could afford Ethan Walker's creation. It was about who could earn his trust. 3 days later, the small garage at the edge of Bozeman no longer felt like a local business. It felt like the center of a storm. News vans occupied every available parking space. Financial reporters stood along the sidewalk delivering updates to national audiences. Luxury vehicles arrived hourly. Some carried venture capital firms. Others carried executives from major automotive companies. Each visitor came with the same goal. They wanted access. They wanted a meeting. They wanted Ethan Walker. Yet Ethan's routine remained unchanged. He opened the garage before sunrise. He repaired vehicles. He greeted customers by name. He swept the floors before closing. The contrast fascinated everyone. One afternoon, Richard Bennett sat across from Ethan in the office. A stack of proposals rested on the desk between them. "The latest offer is significantly higher," Richard said. Ethan glanced at the paperwork. "How much higher?" Richard named the number. Even he seemed impressed. Lily nearly choked on her lemonade. "That is enough money to buy half the town." Richard laughed. "Possibly more than half." Ethan simply slid the document back across the desk. "No," Richard shook his head in amazement. "You are becoming famous for saying that word." Meanwhile, pressure inside Hayes Mobility continued to grow. Victoria's board members were demanding answers. Shareholders wanted action. Competitors were moving aggressively. During a conference call, one executive spoke bluntly. "If Bennett Capital secures an exclusive agreement, we lose years of strategic advantage." Another executive added, "We need Ethan Walker." Victoria stared through the window of her temporary office. The mountains beyond Bozeman glowed beneath the afternoon sun. For the first time in years, she admitted something to herself. This situation was no longer about business. It had become personal. She remembered standing inside the garage and laughing. She remembered dismissing everything she saw. Most of all, she remembered the look on Lily's face. The memory stayed with her. Later that evening, Victoria returned alone. No executives. No analysts. No cameras. The garage was nearly empty. Ethan was finishing a repair while Lily organized invoices near the counter. Victoria approached quietly. "Do you have a minute?" Ethan looked up. "Sure." She hesitated longer than expected. "I owe you an apology." Ethan said nothing. "When I first came here, I judged you before I knew anything about you." Her voice remained steady, but the sincerity was impossible to miss. "I looked at the building and assumed I understood the man standing inside it." Lily glanced toward her father. Ethan listened patiently. Victoria continued. "I was wrong." Silence settled across the garage. The old wall clock ticked softly. The scent of motor oil mixed with fresh evening air drifting through the open door. Finally, Ethan smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not a smug smile. Just a kind one. "Most people are wrong about something," he said. "The important part is what happens after." Victoria nodded slowly. She understood the meaning immediately. Outside, headlights swept across the parking lot. Another convoy of investors had arrived. More offers. More negotiations. More competition. The bidding war was reaching its peak. Yet as Victoria looked around the garage, she realized something remarkable. Despite all the attention, all the money, and all the power gathering around him, Ethan Walker remained exactly the same man he had been before anyone knew his name. The following Friday, nearly 2 weeks after the first luxury SUV had stopped outside Walker Auto, the town gathered for what many believed would be the final chapter of the story. Investors filled the garage. Reporters lined the walls. Industry leaders occupied folding chairs arranged between service bays that had spent years repairing ordinary vehicles for ordinary people. The air carried the familiar scent of machine oil and fresh coffee, but the atmosphere felt different. Expectant, quiet, respectful. On a table near the center of the garage sat a stack of proposals. Some represented partnerships. Others represented acquisitions. The numbers attached to them were large enough to change multiple generations of a family. Richard Bennett sat near the front reviewing one final document. Victoria Hayes stood nearby. Unlike her first visit, there was no arrogance in her posture. No judgment in her expression. Only patience. Ethan arrived carrying a toolbox. Several people laughed softly at the sight. Not because they were mocking him, because somehow it felt perfectly fitting. Even now, after everything that had happened, he still looked more like a mechanic than a man standing at the center of a bidding war. Lily walked beside him, smiling proudly. Ethan placed the toolbox near his workbench and looked around the room. Every conversation stopped. Every eye settled on him. Richard stood first. Before any decisions are made, I believe everyone here deserves to hear from the man who brought us together. A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. Ethan remained silent for a moment. Then he stepped forward. A lot of people have asked me the same question these past few days, he began. His voice was calm, steady, familiar. What are you going to do now? The garage remained completely still. Some people think this story is about technology. He glanced toward the workshop hidden behind the steel door. Some think it is about money. He looked at the stack of offers. Others think it is about winning. He paused. None of those answers are correct. Victoria lowered her eyes. Richard smiled faintly. Ethan continued. 10 years ago, after my wife passed away, I had a choice. I could spend my life being angry about what I lost, or I could spend it building something that honored what I still had. His eyes moved toward Lily. The room softened instantly. Every design, every late night, every sacrifice, every mistake. It was never about becoming rich. It was about creating something meaningful. Silence followed. The kind of silence that cannot be forced. The kind earned through truth. Ethan picked up the largest acquisition proposal and held it briefly in his hands. Then he placed it back on the table. I am not selling. Several people blinked in surprise. Others smiled knowingly. Richard simply nodded. He had expected that answer. Ethan continued. Instead, I am creating the Walker Innovation Center, right here in Bozeman. A murmur spread through the crowd. Young engineers, mechanics, students, dreamers, anyone willing to work hard and learn will have a place there. Lily's eyes filled with emotion. And it will carry the name of the woman who believed in me long before anyone else did. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Victoria felt her throat tighten. Around the room, investors who had arrived prepared to compete suddenly found themselves applauding instead. Not because they had won, because they understood. Ethan had never been trying to build an empire. He had been building a legacy. As the applause slowly faded, Lily slipped her hand into her father's. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the open garage door. The old building stood exactly where it always had. The tools were still there. The concrete floor was still stained. The walls were still worn with age. Yet everything had changed. And in the quiet that followed, the people who once measured success by money finally discovered the value of dignity, character, and the quiet strength of a good man.